Most of us will unknowingly encounter at least one psychopath while we're out and about, going about our lives each day. While many psychopaths have learned to deal with their condition, others are unable to do so, and they end up being written about in the history books, thanks to the heinous crimes that they committed. Number 10. King Herod committed many commendable acts during his rule, such as building the expansion to the Jerusalem kingdom. But he's most remembered for some of the unthinkable acts that he carried out to ensure his rule remained intact. Those who knew him described him as incredibly intelligent, but he was also hailed as an extremely dangerous and probably insane person. It's said that since he was only half Jewish, he felt that he needed to prove himself as the king of Judea during his rule, which stretched from 37 BC to 4 BC. It might be because of this that his ambitions seemed almost unacceptable to some of his subjects, but in his mind, they were completely justified. According to some historians, Herod was likely born in Idumea, and his father may have had no choice but to accept the Jewish faith. His mother, on the other hand, was an Arabian princess, and it's possible that throughout his life, the king felt shunned by those around him. One of his greatest feats was the construction of the city of Herodium. But even that feat is overshadowed by the expansion of Jerusalem's Jewish temple complex, which improved on Solomon's design. He ensured that his fellow Jews were not required to serve in the Roman military. They were also exempt from worshiping emperors, and so were free to practice their religion without persecution. Throughout his rule, he was hailed for these great acts, but he also had a darker side that often terrified those close to him. He was paranoid that a rebellion would take place and that he would be overthrown as king. To ensure that this would never happen, he made a point of ending the life of anyone who threatened his reign, even to the slightest degree. For example, he ended the lives of his first wife, Miriam I, and 3 of his sons when he started believing that they were planning to supplant him. This gave rise to a joke that was often told at the time, which stated that it was safer to be one of Herod's dogs than one of his sons. He was also known to be ruthless when it came to taxing his constituents in order to sustain the economic programs that he'd put into place. Furthermore, it's said that thanks to his insecurity, he ordered that when he passed away, members of his military were to concoct a fictitious crime, after which they were to choose wealthy and influential individuals to pin it on. They were then to be executed, not because Herod held a grudge against them, but because he feared that no one would mourn his demise, and by framing an innocent man, he knew that someone would shed a tear after his passing, even if it wasn't in his honor. Herod was also known for putting out a hit on the life of Jesus Christ, but as we all know, both Jesus and his family were thankfully able to escape his wrath. Whatever the reason may be, many scholars feel that he had psychopathic traits, including the fact that he would let no one stand in the way of his ambitions, as well as the paranoia that plagued him throughout his reign. Number 9. Most serial killers are very meticulous about the way they carry out their crimes. They usually only attack a certain type of person, whether it be women, people with a certain hair color, of a certain age, or even residents of a specific area. But this was not the case with Stephen Richards, who became known as the Nebraska Fiend during the 1870s. He didn't favor any particular type of victim, and wouldn't hesitate to end someone's life if he stood to gain from their passing. According to those who encountered Richards, he was extremely well-spoken, which suggests that he was an intelligent individual. Like many psychopaths, he came across as charming and very polite, but he was also known to be unremorseful of any of the crimes that he committed, with some describing him as proud of those acts instead. He carried himself with poise and had a soft-spoken manner, which is not the type of behavior one would normally associate with a serial killer. But he was also narcissistic, even suggesting that someone should write a book about his life and the crimes that he committed. Richards was born in West Virginia in 1856, but he eventually settled in Iowa. There, he found a job at an asylum, a period in his life that he would later admit affected the sympathy that he showed towards others. In 1877, he decided to relocate to Nebraska, and it was then that he would end the life of his first victim, a man with whom he'd been traveling. After waking up in their camp one morning, the two got into an argument over gambling, and Richards produced a firearm, which he then used to do away with his traveling companion. At one point, he started spending time with the woman who owned a house, and she offered him a chance to purchase the property. He feigned interest, but secretly decided to end her life along with the rest of her family, which he then did. He would later state that he felt no remorse for his actions, nor did he feel any guilt when he used a hammer to end the life of his new neighbor, who started asking questions about the now missing family. By this time, he'd made up his mind that he would achieve every goal that he set for himself, no matter what the cost might be to those around him. Whether this meant betraying his friends, committing crimes, or ending lives, he would not be deterred from his ambitions. He would later admit to ending the lives of 4 men while traveling through Nebraska, but added that these were not his first victims, since he'd ended the life of his traveling companion in 1876. After disposing of his body in a river, he continued on his way, but then came across a man who'd previously seen him traveling with the first victim. Richard realized that the 2 men knew each other well, and felt he had no choice but to also end his life, which he then did. By the time he was arrested, Richards had ended the lives of 9 people, to which he confessed, but it's believed he may have had many more victims. Number 8. As an adult, Earl Nelson would be given the nickname the Gorilla Killer, but before he became a serial killer, he had a very complicated childhood. Both his parents were diagnosed with syphilis and passed away while he was still an infant. He ended up living with his grandmother, who did her best to raise him according to her Pentecostal faith. After he turned 10 years old, his life took a turn, when while riding his bike, he crashed into a streetcar and was badly injured. Nelson remained in a coma for almost a week, and when he finally regained consciousness, he was never the same. He developed a bad temper that was only worsened by the frequent headaches that he suffered from. Complicating matters even further was the passing of his grandmother when he was 14, and he had to relocate again, this time to his aunt and uncle's house. In 1915, he was caught committing a crime for the first time when he broke into a cabin that he mistakenly believed was empty. He was arrested and sentenced to 2 years in prison. There, his behavior only became more erratic, and it worsened after he joined the Navy. He was sent to the Napa State Mental Hospital, but he refused to be kept there and repeatedly escaped. Nelson left the hospital in 1925, and in February of the following year, he ended the life of his first victim, Clara Newman. He'd clearly decided to follow a life of crime, since he then attacked and ended the life of Laura Beale just 2 weeks later. He'd approached both women under the guise of renting a room from them, and put their minds at ease by often reading the Bible. This gave them the impression that he was a good and honest man, when the truth was that he was planning to attack them all along. He ended both women's lives via strangulation, after which he left their bodies under his bed, on one occasion sleeping in his bed with the victim beneath it for 3 nights. He managed to avoid the law by constantly moving around, and whenever he committed an attack, he would leave the area as soon as possible. What counted in his favor was the fact that the authorities were unfamiliar with the concept of a serial killer, and Nelson's crimes were only later attributed to a single individual. He found more victims in San Francisco, Oregon, Portland, San Jose, and Canada, and on several occasions the wrong men were arrested for crimes that he committed. In 1927, he was arrested after a woman was found deceased in his rented room, and another was found deceased under a bed in the house that was owned by her and her husband. On that occasion, he gave the fake name Virgil Wilson and managed to escape from his jail cell in Wacopa. He was arrested shortly after, and in November of that year, his trial began. But when it came to light that he had attacked 10 women in less than a week, he was found guilty and executed on the 13th of January, 1928. Number 7. During the American Revolution, Samuel Mason reached the rank of captain and was placed in command of Fort Henry in Ohio. He was known amongst his men as an honorable leader, but he nearly lost his life after the fort was attacked in August of 1777. On that occasion, a group of tribesmen attacked the fort, and Mason, along with 14 other soldiers, responded. They rode out on their horses, but were soon driven back, and by the time that he made it back to safety, he was the lone survivor, but had been gravely injured. Following his military service, he relocated to Washington County in Pennsylvania, where he started farming and serving as Justice of the Peace. While his life seemed to be on track, the reality was that he'd fallen deep into debt and had no means of paying. When rumors started to swirl that he'd stolen from people living in the area in 1874, he decided to relocate again, this time to Kentucky. His farm was sold, but he still had many unpaid debts, and the courts sent debt collectors to find him. While on the run, he ended up in the Ohio River with his 4 sons, all of whom decided to take up piracy. They created a cave hideout next to the river, and whenever they encountered a traveler, they would invite them in with promises of food and shelter. Once the travelers decided to continue on their way, the 5 men would end their lives and rob them of whatever possessions they were carrying. At some point, they came across the notorious Harp Brothers gang, but Mason eventually asked them to leave when he found their methods to be too sadistic. They were eventually forced to move out of the cave by another gang, but they continued their crime spree along the Mississippi River and ended the lives of several more people. By this time, they were well known to the law, and bounty hunters were desperate to bring them to justice. They were captured at one point but managed to escape, ending the life of at least 1 man in the process. When the bounty on their heads was increased, dozens of men started searching for Mason and his sons, but they always seemed to be one step ahead of the law. One group came close to capturing the fugitives when they found their camp near Rocky Springs, Mississippi, but the gang had already fled. A few of the bounty hunters pursued their trail, but were eventually forced to turn back when it became clear that Mason had made good his escape. In 1803, though, their luck ran out when Spanish officials learned of their whereabouts, and they were taken into custody in Missouri. They were taken, along with several other prisoners, to New Madrid, where they were put on trial for piracy. Mason claimed that he was being framed, but when his possessions were searched, the authorities found $7,000 in cash and 20 scalps that he had taken from his victims. He and his cohorts were found guilty, but while being transported to New Orleans by boat, they managed to escape, despite Mason being wounded. The bounty on his head was increased to $2,500, and this time, one of the Hart brothers, Wiley, decided to claim the money. He tracked Mason down and ended his life, but when he was recognized as one of the Hart brothers while trying to claim the bounty, he was quickly arrested and executed. It remains unknown how many lives Mason ended, but he's considered to be one of America's first ever serial killers, along with the Hart brothers and their gang of outlaws. Number 6. Unrequited love led Thomas Carr to take the life of his fiancée, Louisa Fox, after she called off their engagement. Born in Virginia in 1846, Carr had an abusive, alcoholic father, and after his father passed away, the family struggled, forcing Carr into manual labor. He had a troubled youth, marked by stealing, running away, and frequent fights. He served in the Union Army during the Civil War, struggling with an explosive temper until an injury discharged him in 1863. While working in a coal mine, Carr met and fell in love with Louisa, a servant. They became engaged, but her family learned of his violent temper, leading Louisa to end the relationship in January of 1869. When she visited Carr's cabin on January 21st, she disappeared. Her remains were found the next day in a nearby creek. Police arrested Carr, who confessed to ambushing, kissing, and then taking the life of Louisa as she walked home. He then shockingly confessed to taking the lives of 14 men and attempting to take the lives of 2 others, mostly travelers that he robbed while in the military. After he was found guilty, Carr was sentenced to execution. Witnesses reported that he laughed upon hearing the sentence, stating he didn't care if he died. His execution was on March 24th, 1870. Number 5. Lydia Sherman seemed like a caring and trustworthy woman who followed her dream of becoming a nurse. To those around her, she seemed to enjoy taking care of the ill and aged, but her true nature would come to the fore soon enough, earning her the moniker the Derby Poisoner. Lydia originally hailed from New Jersey, where she was born in 1824. Her parents both passed away while she was still a baby, and she was sent to live with her uncle. She started working as a tailor at the age of 16, and a year later, she met a police officer named Edward Struck, whom she would eventually marry. Struck had 2 children from a previous marriage, but he and Lydia would go on to have 6 more. With such a large family to support, Struck was often under financial pressure, and their situation only got worse when he lost his job. He became depressed when he was unable to find other work, and Lydia decided that she had to do something about it. She purchased arsenic, which was often used as a cleaning product back then, and used it to end Struck's life. No one suspected anything, and Lydia decided to relocate to Connecticut, and there she met her second husband, a farmer named Dennis Hurlbert, who was much older than her. She made sure to show affection towards him while they were out in public, and to avoid suspicion, since by all accounts, Hurlbert was an unattractive man who owned a lot of land. After they got married, Lydia convinced him to change his will, and she was named as the sole beneficiary. With this done, Hurlbert's health soon started to decline, and despite the best efforts of doctors to help him, he passed away. This time, a few more rumors started to spread about Lydia's involvement, but with no proof that she was responsible for his demise, nothing could be done. She then started working as a housekeeper for Horatio Sherman, who fell in love with her and asked her to marry him. As is to be expected, she said yes, and already started planning how to end his life. Sherman was known to enjoy a drink or two each night, giving Lydia the perfect means to carry out her plan. She laced his drink with arsenic, and soon enough, he also passed away. But this time, a doctor became suspicious and ordered that an autopsy be performed. When this was done, a large amount of arsenic was found in Sherman's system, and Lydia was arrested. During questioning, she decided to come clean and confess to ending the lives of every man she'd ever been married to, in order to get her hands on their money. She was sentenced to life behind bars, but in 1877, she escaped and fled to Rhode Island. There, she was caught using a fake name and rearrested. In May of 1878, she became ill while incarcerated and soon passed away. It's since been speculated that she had more victims, but she took that secret to her grave, and the true extent of her crimes will likely never be known. Number 4. Being employed as an executioner during the 1800s must have been a harrowing job, but one man, William Calcraft, seemed to relish this position and often showed his psychopathic side while carrying out his duties. William was born in Little Baddow, Essex, England in 1800. He was known to be a very compassionate man who loved his family and had a special love of animals, rabbits being his favorite. At first he worked as a cobbler, but then also started selling pies whenever a prisoner was to be executed at Newgate, and this brought some extra money into his household. It was there that he met an executioner named James Foxon, who performed his macabre duties in Middlesex and London. The two became friends, and soon William was offered a position at Newgate Prison, which he accepted since the pay was substantially better than the money he was making as a cobbler or a pie seller. But in 1829, he was given the duty of performing his first execution, that of Thomas Lister, a man who'd been found guilty of housebreaking. That same day, he ended the life of highwayman George Wingfield, who was executed in Lincoln City. When Foxon passed away later that same year, William was offered the position of London and Middlesex's official executioner, and once again he accepted. He carried out the first of many executions on the 14th of February that year, when Esther Hibner, who'd been found guilty of ending someone's life, met her end. William took great pleasure in his new role and would carry out a further 31 executions that year alone. He soon became somewhat of a celebrity in London, but many people found his methods odd and unnecessarily slow, leading to suggestions that he might not be the right man for the job. Some people would leave these public executions horrified, as they'd witnessed events that are too gruesome to mention. Meanwhile, William was making a lot of money since his travel expenses were paid for, and he earned £10 for each life that he ended. He was also allowed to keep the clothing worn by the people whose lives he ended, and so he never needed to spend money on his attire. What items he didn't use, he sold back to the prisoners' families or to wax museums in the area. Many of the executions that William carried out would have been classified as botched in modern times, but by all accounts, he planned these events meticulously so that they would play out exactly as he wanted. There was no doubt that he had a sadistic side, despite being described by his friends and family as a compassionate man. Throughout his career, he ended the lives of many notable people, including that of Catherine Wilson, who was found guilty of poisoning as many as 9 people while working as a nurse. She maintained her innocence until her last moments and is remembered for being the last woman ever to be executed at Newgate. Her passing is also noted as being one of the few where William did his job correctly without any untoward incident. He carried out his last execution in 1874, after which he retired, but continued to live comfortably thanks to his pension of around £1.25 a week. He eventually passed away on the 13th of December, 1879, and is still remembered today as one of the most notorious executioners in the history of England. Number 3. Nikolai Dzumagaliev has spent a lot of time in and out of mental facilities throughout his life, and with good reason. He's also known by the nickname Metal Fang, thanks to his false teeth, which are made out of white metal believed to be steel. Nikolai was born in Kazakhstan in 1952, and it's said that he had a normal and happy upbringing. He attended school as he should and completed his mandatory military service without incident. At one stage, he attempted to become a chauffeur, but failed to pass his classes at Kazakh University, and so he started looking for work elsewhere. At one point, he got into a physical altercation with an unknown man, and in the process lost his front teeth. He decided to replace them with dentures, but strangely chose metal dentures rather than the normal material. Nevertheless, he was said to be a good-looking man who was popular among the women he met, and in 1977, he started working as a fireman. He spent a lot of time with many different women, and was soon diagnosed with 2 diseases. That's when his hatred towards women started manifesting, and his life of crime began in an ill-conceived plot of revenge. In 1979, he snuck up behind a woman who was walking along a street alone, and he attacked her. As soon as she noticed him, she started to turn around, having gotten a fright, and Nikolai grabbed her before attacking her with a blade and ending her life. The details that followed this crime, and the ones that he committed later on, will not be discussed here, but the authorities were shocked by the attack and were determined to capture the culprit. But due to a lack of evidence and witnesses, they made no progress, and the case was closed with no suspects identified. Having gotten away with such a heinous crime, Nikolai only grew bolder, and he ended the lives of 5 more women over the span of 6 months. Later that year, he got into an altercation with a fellow firefighter, whose life he then ended with a firearm, and he was arrested. At his trial, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and after he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, he was set free. He then traveled back to his hometown, where he ended the lives of 3 more women, one of whom was a friend of his. He committed that crime while guests were present at his house, and when they realized what he was doing behind closed doors, they notified the police. Upon arriving at the house, officers barged into the room, but they were so shocked by what they saw that they were rendered immobile, allowing Nikolai to escape. He was tracked down at his cousin's house the next day and taken into custody for a second time, and while being questioned, he revealed the extent of his crimes and claimed that all of the women whose lives he'd ended were street workers, but this was not the case. He was found incompetent to stand trial due to his mental condition, but he was eventually sent to a mental health clinic in Atkas, where he remains today and spends his days working as a maintenance man. Number 2. If it weren't for one incident that took place in 1988, it might never have come to light that Juha Valjakkala was a psychopath. But one wrong decision that he made changed his life and those of his victims' families forever. Juha, who hailed from Finland, relocated to Sweden when he was 23 years old, and there he commenced a life as a career criminal, and he was already well known to the law in Finland, as he'd been arrested there an astonishing 63 times by the time he turned 15. those offenses weren't too serious and included petty theft, assault, and vandalism. Since he was still a minor at the time, he could not be sent to prison, and so he was released after spending a short time in custody. As an adult, though, he grew more ambitious as a criminal, and he started breaking into people's houses. It would seem that he enjoyed his life as a criminal, but he wasn't very good at it, and by his early 20s, he'd been arrested several more times. By 1988, he'd been sent to prison 11 times, but after serving his time, he was released, and he reunited with Merida, who was his girlfriend. Still, he'd not learned his lesson, and continued committing petty crimes without hesitation. He and Merida started traveling around Scandinavia, stealing from unsuspecting victims before quickly relocating to a new area to avoid being captured. They ended up stealing 30 cars in less than 3 months, breaking into houses along the way. They never harmed any of their victims, and usually only stole food, clothing, and money to get by. But on one occasion, they found a large firearm in one house and decided to keep it. They ended up in the village of Amsel by chance after randomly selecting a direction to drive in when they came upon a crossroads in Sweden. They committed a few burglaries there, but the couple's crime spree would come to an end after stealing a bicycle from the home of the Nilsson family. Juha, who was heavily intoxicated, was spotted by Sten Nilsson and his son Frederick, both of whom gave chase. Juha and Merida attempted to flee on the bicycle, but the father and son chased them in a car and eventually managed to corner the robbers in a cemetery. Juha decided that he didn't want to go back to prison, produced the stolen firearm, and ended both Sten and Frederick's lives. When Sten's wife, Juha, became concerned when they didn't come home, she traveled to the cemetery to look for them, and there she found Juha waiting in ambush. He attacked her with a blade and also ended her life. They were eventually tracked down to Odense Central Station in Denmark, where they were arrested, and after being sent for evaluation, Juha was diagnosed as a psychopath. He was sentenced to life in prison, while Merida received a sentence of 2 years behind bars. Number 1. Many people believe that Somkid Pumpuang, a Thai serial killer, did not face the full consequences of the crimes that he committed, but he was released from prison early due to being what the authorities described as a model prisoner. He had to flee from his village in Trang province after committing a string of petty crimes there, and the villagers decided to take matters into their own hands. Following this, he had nowhere to live and ended up moving around the country until he could find a steady job. Pumpuang, known as the Serpent and the Jack the Ripper of Thailand, served as the police officer during the 1980s. At first, he was hailed as a good officer, but before long, he realized he'd become infatuated with some of the female victims of the crimes that he was tasked with solving. Most of these women were street workers who'd been attacked, and before long, he found himself incapable of performing his duties normally. In 1984, he passed the point of no return when he lured a woman named Yuban to a secluded spot, where he then ended her life. It should be noted that some sources dispute this case and state that Pumpuang only started committing his more serious crimes in 2005. They also state that he was never a police officer. What is certain, though, is that he would go on to end the lives of at least 5 women over the course of just 5 months. The first of these victims was a cafe singer. She was found deceased in a hotel. She was found in the bathtub with her hands bound, and when the room was searched, it was discovered that her cell phone and gold necklace were missing. Pumpuang had made his escape after stealing her motorbike. Next, he ended the life of a masseuse, and her remains were found under very similar circumstances on the 4th of June that year. Pumpuang was still not under any suspicion, and had seemingly gotten away with another heinous attack. His third victim, yet another cafe singer, was found deceased in a hotel room just a week later, and the authorities started to suspect that they were dealing with a serial killer, due to the similar modus operandi that was used during each attack. He would go on to end the lives of 2 other masseuses during that same month, with the former being found in a hotel room and the latter in a mansion. While in the process of his next attack, Pumpuang was arrested after he was spotted leading a woman to a hotel. Officers lay in wait after tracing one of the victim's cell phones to the hotel, and he was taken into custody. He was charged with all of the attacks, and he was sentenced to life in prison, but this was later commuted to just 13 years. Thank you guys so much for watching.